So with the bodywork finally done and painted, we can move on to the interior. And you probably couldn't see me, but I just said interior with air quotes. Because it's more than just an interior. It's a whole basic interior tub with the engine. But this is only going to have half of the interior. It'll make sense later, I promise you. The reason this installment took so long to get out is because there were just so many parts. Everything is small and fiddly, and paint takes time to dry. I only get about an hour and a half a night to work on these, so most of my nights were spraying down paint, waiting for it to dry. Coming in the following night, masking it off, putting down the next layer of paint, waiting for it to dry. So what I'm doing now is I am just laying down all the base coats. Before that, I give everything a bath in acetone to remove any mold release, any fingerprints, anything that will hinder paint. Because resin is very unforgiving. And for the sake of saving some time here, off camera, I painted everything beforehand with Tamiya Rattle Can Gray Primer. Any metal etching primer is what you want for any 3D printed or cast resin. The interior, for the most part though, it's just two basic colors. It is tan and black. There's a little bit of silver accents, some carbon fiber. We'll get into that later. But for the most part, I am laying down our heavy base coats. Now for the black portion of this, I am just laying down a good coat of Tamiya LP5, just their semi-gloss black lacquer. And for the other half, I'm using some Tamiya TS46 light sand. Now this stuff is kind of hard to come by, as it is a primary base coat for all the 135 armor builders. Basically any army thing that takes place in the desert, this is a base coat for it. And that's a little bit unfortunate because to my eye, this is the perfect match for the saddle tan that Ferrari uses. And that is just straight out of the can. It's got just enough sheen to it to give a very convincing leather look. After that has had plenty of time to dry, I moved on to some masking. I went online to Ferrari's website to their car application builder. Like if I were going to order this car, this would be how I spec'd it. So this is my personal taste, my design. If I had $800 million, this is how I would buy this car. And it was right about here when tragedy struck. I mean, little tragedy. I can't fix this. The cowl on the upper part of the gauges, it was cast thin, super fragile, and well, some of the masking tape took a chunk of it with it. So I kind of had to divert from my configuration, and I decided to paint that section silver. More on that later because I'm mad. So I'm going to set this down and work on something else. And that something else is going to be flocking the interior. Now there are a million flocking videos out there. I didn't waste my time on the whole process, so I'm just going to do this small little section. So in the past, I used to use Mod Podge or black paint or clear paint to kind of act as my binder. Now I realize it doesn't truly matter as long as it's sticky. So I am using some 79-cent, just good old-fashioned cheap school glue, the white glue. Just put a little bit of water in it so it's kind of thinner and lays out better. Then I am just going to go on and I am just going to smudge that place all over. Even the spots that I missed on the first round. I'm better than this. I failed you all. I apologize. And once all that is laid out, you got good coverage, just sprinkle some flocking material onto that adhesive. If I could give you any tip here, it is to not overdo this, because 90% of this is just going to get knocked off. But once you're happy with the coverage, just start tapping. This is going to cause vibrations and it's going to spread that around. So flip it sideways, flip it the other way, flip it upside down. The idea here is just to kind of spread all that out. And if you're like me and had some bald spots, do not forget to make sure you get flocking on them. Flocking. That's a fun word to say. Alright, so while that was drying, I forgot to turn on my camera. So I did a whole lot of small little fiddly detail painting on this center console. Now believe it or not, everything except for that red bit there is a decal. All the black gauge faces, there is the window switches in front of the armrest. Right there, armrest. There is even a very tiny little piece of photo etch on that I cannot get to focus for some reason. And try as I might, I'm just going to show you what the real piece looks like right here. Yeah, Alpha model, they recreated that in 124 form. And in person, it looks perfect. I just can't get my camera to focus. From there though, this upper piece, it just slots into the lower piece, and that is our center console completed. And that pool of paint down inside the center console there, that is still kind of wet. And that should be dry by now. I'm kind of worried. I guess we'll see how that looks the next morning. Alrighty, moving on to the dashboard though. We have a whole bunch of photo etch inserts that get a decal over it. So what I did to make this a little bit easier for me is I peeled off the clear film on just one side. And then I cut off all the little, I don't know, anchor points, whatever you call them on photo etch. Then I'm just going to apply the decal directly over those. Since I left the film on the other side, it will hold each piece in place just fine while I get all the decals, everything laid out just fine. Now I'm going to show you just one decal being laid out in the essence of saving time, but here is all the dashboard pieces on their proper photo etch. Now even though that photo etch does friction fit into the dash fairly well, I plan on this thing sitting on my display shelf until I die, so I want just a little bit more security. So I'm going to do just a tiny tad bit of glue in there just to hold it in place and make it that much secure. Now normally what I would also like to do is put some UV resin over those to kind of make it look like glass. But if you look at these things, they're LED type LCD screens, much like your TV. When they're off, there is not a glare. So bare decal it is. Now, as I said, friction fit, but watch this. This whole decal photo etch thing will drop into a recess. Right there. I just added glue because I'm paranoid. Alrighty. It is finally time to deal with that chip on the upper cowl. So the gauge bezel for the tack, it is also silver, a non-contrasting color. It is a bright color, it will not absorb light, so it will not create a shadow. It is essentially hidden, and it doesn't look too bad. Just don't tell anybody what's going on here. It is our secret. From there though, it is just installing all the fiddly little bits They're pre-painted, they just drop into place. They fit perfect. And just like the gauges, they don't really need glue. They will friction fit in there, but hey, add some glue. It won't hurt anything. And there is one tiny piece of photo etch. I'm not sure what that mesh screen is for. It is never said. It's clearly not a vent. I don't know what it's for. There's also one single metal transfer that I am having the hardest time peeling up. I eventually give up and I try to peel this up from the other side with much success. And with that guy finally peeled off, I just do a quick coat of some Tamiya panel line accent down in all the vents, the recesses, just to add some depth. Now I'm going to set this off to the side and we are going to work on the lower half of the dashboard. There is not a whole lot to the lower piece, just a little bit more of that panel line accent color to bring out the decals, and then just 2 carbon fiber decals. They gave us a photo etch piece for this to lay out on, then glue in place. From all my reference photos, it looks like that panel that fit on, it's just a little bit concave, and the photo edge is flat. So I skipped the photo etch and I applied this decal directly to the dashboard. It needed just a tiny tad bit of persuasion to get it to fit, but in the end I am super happy with how that laid out. Now on the opposite side of the steering column there is the tiniest little itty bitty baby piece of carbon fiber. If you're not looking for it, you guys will completely overlook that. I'll be honest, if I didn't put that in there, it wouldn't look out of place. Alpha model though, they know it's there, so they gave it to us to install. Details, people, details. Moving on to the steering wheel. This is basically a command center. Ferrari wanted this car to be totally driver centric. So all the controls, wipers, blinkers, radio control, all of that is built into the steering wheel. Alpha model, hey, they knew this. And I keep saying this, but yeah, they knew this. So they gave us the proper decals. Everything is replicated perfectly. Now, it's kind of hard to tell because carbon fiber over black, but trust me, if you see this in person, it's actually there. And we can't forget about our prancing horse for the center of the steering wheel, which also has its own photo etch piece. As I mentioned at the beginning of the video, I only got a few hours a night, so I got all my decals laid out. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to go over with some microsol just to get everything set and laid out, so when I come down the following morning, these decals will be sucked in and locked in place. Now, just between you and I, this setting solution, the solvent for the decals, it is kind of caustic. So do yourself a favor and take extra precaution to keep it on just your decals. If you get it on any of the paint, do your best to wipe it off before it dries. So I let all that set to dry overnight, and we're coming back to that emblem on the steering wheel. That is a 3D emblem. So I'm going to replicate that, and I'm going to put just a few little dollops of UV resin right in the center of that emblem. Capillary action will draw all that out, and it will create a dome, a reverse meniscus, if you will. So I'm just going to kind of burn that in place with a little bit of UV light to set that UV resin. Now that light makes that dry almost instantly, and then we could finally install it right smack dead center in that recess in our steering wheel. And you guys might think I know what I'm doing, because I almost got that perfectly aligned, just dropping it in there blindly. Just a little bit of adjustment is all we need. Alright, then I forgot to turn my camera again, but some red detail paint on the start button and the mode selector. With the steering wheel done, we can move on to our next dilemma. Dilemma, however that's pronounced. As you can see, all that carbon fiber accent, you can't see it. So for the shifter flappy panels here, I am kinda torn. I don't know if I should leave these silver to break up all the black in there just so you guys know they're there. On the other hand though, we got some beautiful carbon fiber decals to kind of set them apart. Yeah, decisions. I couldn't do it. I had to paint it silver just to break up all the black in there. Alright, so before we use this piece, we got to install the actual steering column. And it just slots into place like so. And the flappy panels themselves, they will just install into the back of the steering wheel like so. And as they're not completely flat, we got to give them just a tiny bit of bend to kind of make them match the contour of the steering wheel like so. And being that that is a round peg fitting in a round hole, it doesn't really align that well, so I'm going to use some slow setting glue just to give me some time to position it like so. Are you guys tired of me saying like so yet? So that is essentially the upper dashboard complete. Now we could just mate it together with the bottom dashboard. And it's got these two huge pins. They fit together like so with no problems. Alrighty, so we're going to set that off to the side, and we are going to work on our door cards. Now the speaker panels, they got just a tiny little decal that actually goes on here. I've looked at countless reference photos, I've watched all the videos on YouTube. There are actually buttons on this. I have no idea what they do, but there are random buttons and dials and knobs on the speaker panel for the driver's side door panel. Now for the speakers, Alpha model, they also gave us these fiddly, itty bitty tiny little photo etch pieces. Now it's kind of hard to see here, but these actually have JBL etched into them. So here is a macro photo so you guys could zoom way in and see them. As you guys probably guessed, yeah, they slot into place. They fit perfectly. Zero problems on the door panel. Now the door pulls themselves, I gotta call out Alpha model. If you see, they have that leather kind of insert. They followed that all the way around. There is a 360-degree detail. Nobody will see the back of those, but they still chose to fully detail it. I don't know why, but, well, that's Alpha model for you. But those pieces, they fit in place just as perfect as the speakers. And just like the dashboard, there were some random mesh pieces on the actual door cards to themselves. I don't know what this serves, but yeah, there is some mesh built into the door panel. And I probably shouldn't have used metal tweezers to install that. I went back afterwards to touch up all the paint that they scraped off. Now the seats themselves, not a lot of detail, just one solid color, a little bit of black accent, and then just some traditional seatbelt buckles. Yeah, we are going with a traditional 3-point, just regular boring old seatbelt on this car. Alrighty, so disclaimer. I wasn't paying attention to the instructions. We got to do the engine now because we cannot install any of the interior bits until the engine is done. So yeah, I'm just painting the majority of the engine pieces a base silver coat, and since I had some silver in my airbrush, I also painted the hubs, the parts that the wheels will attach to on the actual chassis when we get to that later. And just like the interior, it's got two primary base coats, silver and black. So I just done the silver, now I'm laying out the black. And much like the interior, I let that set up and dry overnight. Then I came back the following night, did a little bit of masking, and I laid out some red detail paint. And you'll see it later, but basically these are the tappet covers or valve covers, depending on where you're from, and half of the intake manifold. These are actually powder coated. If you look at the real thing, this is a textured paint. Now I have textured paint to make this look more realistic. I also make my own textured paint, but it has some metal transfers that goes over it. So instead I just opted for some flat clear. That will give it just a tiny tad bit of sheen, but also create a crackle to make it kind of look photo etch. You guys will see later. Other than that though guys, it is just more masking, waiting for paint to dry, peeling off the masking tape, more painting. Eventually all these components will come together and we'll have an engine. Now it doesn't quite look like powder coating, but they molded a lot of pieces in, so I couldn't do the textured paint because, well, not everything is textured. So the flat I sprayed before the red was actually dry, so it gave us an orange peel, just a little bit of texture, but just enough sheen, so it kinda, from a distance, it looks like powder coating. And with the masking tape peeled off, I spent literally a whole night, probably an hour and a half, just dealing with the metal transfers. I don't know if you guys have ever tried to get two separate metal transfers line up on an uneven convex shape. Getting these lined up together to match was a pain. I got so frustrated I didn't even record it. I took the camera off the whole rig and then I didn't record it. Moving on ahead though, I got both of them set in place and lined up the very best I could, and there is one tiny piece of photo etch that fits between these two here. And try as I might, no matter how you spray out photo etch mesh, the grill, some of the slats, they're gonna get full. I don't know a way to make that not happen. Luckily though, a lot of that is hidden. We won't see it. So now we're just going to move on with installing all those pieces we had just painted. Now these all have some super huge locating tabs that fit against flat parts. You literally cannot mess this up. Now for the valve covers, there was a whole lot of tiny fiddly little detail painting I could not do through a viewfinder, so I did all that off camera. And for the oil reservoir here, I could not figure out how this went into place with just that illustration on the instructions. Eventually, I just said, hey, this fits here, and it sits straight. So that's what I went with. If that's wrong, Alpha model, I'm sorry. I didn't know better. Now, luckily though, these what I thought were actually inner fenders, these are the exhaust manifolds and turbos. Well, they got 4 locating tabs, so they fit in perfectly. And just like those, everything else from here just slots in place. You cannot mess them up. Even if you try, they'll only go in one way. And you guys know me, I usually have a drink or 7 when I'm building my kits. Alpha model engineered this. These pieces, either they're going to fit or they're going to not. It's idiot proof. Now that being said, the intake manifold, do take your time to make sure it is sitting flush and level. And we have to do that because the intake airbox, it kind of levers into place and it locates off the back of the intake manifold. Now with all that being said, do not worry, because if you got just one thing kind of off skew a tiny tad bit, this engine cowl will hide most of your sins. It is extremely forgiving. Alrighty, so that cowl, it's also got our provisions for our seat belts. So this has to be put in and assembled before we do the interior. Now, as I was saying, we're doing just a standard, regular 3-point seat belt. This is the only reference photo I could find for any car that did not have a 5-point harness. Now, the seat belts themselves, they tuck up under the back of the seat themselves. So we're going to do that, but first we got to get our center console in place so we know how to locate our seats. And you'll notice on the bottom of the seats, that tab is kind of offset. These will only fit in one way. However, the slot is kind of loose, so there is a little bit of play. So we got to get the center console in first to get proper spacing. And for the actual seat belt itself, as you can see, I'm just going to pull that into the corner of the seat slot. I don't know what you call that. That way it'll be located properly once we get everything glued in place. And the buckle on that is kind of giving me some fits, but work your way around it and eventually you'll have something that looks like this. The super glue I used to hold the seats in place, it kind of seeped into that seatbelt material. That's okay, it made it all that much easier just to snip it all flush. Now, oddly enough, the seat belts, once it's all installed, this interior tub is fit into the body, you won't see those. That doesn't matter though. You and I, we know they're there. We took the time to do this right. That is basically it for the interior though, guys. If you remember this body from the second installment of this playlist, I'm going to show you how all this fits together with oops, hold on here, stand by. Alright, our door panel has got some slots to it, and on the body there is a big long slot with a 90-degree, you guys can't see that, I'll just show you. The door panel slots into the actual body itself, like so. And the dashboard, it levers into place and fits into the body, like so. All of that's going to get installed into the next segment, but for now, yeah, we got a lot of dust we got to polish out of this clear coat. And that is it for now though, guys. That is the interior and the engine, that whole assembly done. And according to YouTube law, I have to say like, subscribe, share, comment, or don't. I don't care. As long as you watch this and you learn something or you're entertained, that is all that matters to me. Have a good night.